how do we process all of this coming in? You have to start to categorize. The problem is when you start to categorize, you start to prioritize and judge, and there's a hierarchy and there's labels, and that's when the problems start. I love the other species in the animal kingdom because they don't do that. We do, but they don't do that. They don't worry about, oh, did I get put in the good girl box today? Or did I get booted out of? That's what I always was worried about. Was I booted out of the good girl box today? My mother had this thing where it was her S list. And for the longest time, I didn't know what her S list was growing up. And she would always say, she's on my S list.
Yes.
That's her, her whatever list. And
alrighty, it is time to stop hitting snooze and awaken to a life worth being, the fun and inspiring podcast that dives deep into what makes life truly fulfilling. I'm your host, Sue Willoughby, a self-proclaimed badass transformational life coach for women over 40. Join me as I explore the extraordinary journeys of ordinary people who've transformed their lives from the inside out. Tune in weekly to uncover the secrets to smashing through your perceived limits and creating a life that's not just well lived, but totally worth being. Hello, beautiful listeners. I am so excited to be back today. I took a little hiatus over the holidays, but when this comes out, it'll probably be March anyway, so the hiatus will be well behind me. Today on A Life Worth Being, I'm joined by Betsy Pepine. There we go. By Betsy Pepine. She is a best-selling author. Her latest book is Breaking Boxes, Dismantling the Metaphorical Boxes That Bind Us. Betsy is a serial entrepreneur and the powerhouse behind Pepine Realty. It is an Inc. 5000. She's also an Inc. 5000 honoree and top producing real estate. Let me start over again. Sorry, I got a little tongue twisted there. I was getting hung up on your name. So I'm going to take a break here. Pepine. Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to A Life Worth Being. I'm joined today by Betsy Pepine, who is a best-selling author of her recent book entitled Breaking Boxes, Dismantling the Metaphorical Boxes That Bind Us. Betsy is a serial entrepreneur and the powerhouse behind Pepine Realty, which is an Inc. 5000 honoree and top producing real estate team. Betsy's impact extends far beyond her business ventures. She is also the founder of Pepine Gives, which tackles housing insecurity for at-risk families. With an MBA from Wharton and a passion for breaking barriers, Betsy is here to share her journey and insights on living authentically. Betsy, welcome to the show. Let's dive into your story, please. I'm so excited to talk to you today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So best-selling author, highly rated real estate company. I mean, you've got so much going on. I'm very impressed. And I know that you've also got some really lovely endorsements from Barbara Corcoran. So that's pretty amazing as well. What brings you to where you are today? I'm sure you have a lot to unpack. So we've got some time.
Okay. What brings me here today, it's been a long journey. I've had a lot of pivots in my life, some expected, some unexpected. I think we all have.
Mm-hmm.
And so like you, I'm in real estate and had built several companies in the real estate realm and have been so blessed by the community support of my businesses. So I've had success there and it's been wonderful. But I found myself in my mid-40s feeling discontent and not fulfilled and happy. And it took me a good year to even admit that to myself because I didn't think I had the right to be unhappy. I see so many people that have, it's like a first world problem to be unhappy, I think. And so I didn't feel like I had the right to not be unhappy. And then I just said, I can't continue to live the way I'm living because I felt like such a disconnect between my soul and the way I was living. And so I began just pausing. I remember looking at the internet one day and I saw a picture of this girl who, it's a girl who looks like she's about 4 years old. She's in her one piece bathing suit. Her arms and legs are spread out as wide as can be on her lawn, and rain is pouring down on her head, and her smile is just pure unbridled joy. And across her bathing suit, it says, "Remember her. She's still there inside you,
Mm.
waiting. Let's go get her." And that picture stopped me in my tracks. And as you can see, I had it printed on canvas. I have it on my walls in both my home office and my work office. It's my screensaver on my phone and on my computer. I wanted that. And about a year later, I live in Florida, and we were hunkering down for a hurricane. And anytime we have a hurricane, through hurricane season, I always have projects because invariably the power goes out and you're kind of stuck there. It could be for days. And so this particular hurricane, the power went out, and sure enough, it was dark. I lit my candles, and my project was to put all these, I had a habit of putting photos into boxes. And so I had boxes and boxes of photos, but they weren't nicely put in albums. And so I bought albums, and this was my project for this hurricane season. So I pull out the boxes, and I've got my candles, and I start doing this project. So towards the end of it, I'm nearing the end, and I'm taking the boxes, the empty boxes, to the kitchen trash can. And the bottom of the last box, I can see there's a photo that's face down in that box. And it was too dark for me to see what the photo was, but I pulled it out and I took it near a candle. And I was like, I felt like a bolt of lightning hit me, and not from the storm outside. I took that photo and a candle, and I ran down the hall to my home office, this office that I'm sitting in now. And I took that picture that I was holding in my hand, and I put it up next to this girl. And I look back at the picture I'm holding, and it's a picture of a little girl in her favorite red striped one piece bathing suit. And she's in the Atlantic Ocean, jumping over a wave, facing her dad, who's about 2 or 3 feet in front of her, taking her photo. And her face has this smile of pure unbridled joy. And then on the bottom of that photo, is my mother's faded handwriting that says Betsy aged 4. And I
Wow.
thought, oh my gosh, I was that girl at one
Yeah.
time. And somehow I just lost my way. I was busy checking the boxes that I thought, well, what I believed society, my family, my peers, ingrained in me that this is what success equals, or, you check these boxes and you'll have success. And then I made this huge assumption that thus I will be happy and content. And that was an assumption I shouldn't have made, because I was successful in my business, but I didn't feel fulfilled and authentic in my life. And so I started a process of journaling. I've always written and had diaries and things like that as a girl, but really journaling, meditation, yoga, therapy for the first time in my life, EMDR, bioenergetics. I was very open, and still am, to all these different modalities to understand myself better. I grew up in a home where a lot of great core values, but one of them was not, let's explore your feelings.
Right.
It was always, Betsy, what do you think? I was never asked, Betsy, how does this make you feel? And
Mm.
so it's just been an incredible journey of learning. I feel like I'm almost like in kindergarten in this realm of knowledge that I'm deficient in. But the thread through all of this, what I found was this feeling of containment. And, if you've ever bought a, a mattress online, like on Amazon, like it will literally come to your door in a box.
Yeah.
And you think, how can a king size mattress fit in that box? And sure enough, you open up the box, and 3 days later, you've got a king size mattress. It's expanded to
Mhm.
the size it was meant to be. But I felt like I was in that box, and I hadn't no one's ripped it open. I hadn't ripped myself open. I couldn't expand and be my full, true, authentic self. So that's why, I have all these remembrances and flashbacks of times I felt this confinement and felt like I couldn't say anything, or I couldn't do anything, or I felt stuck, or I was afraid that, what would people think? What would I think of myself? What would my family think if I took this direction? And so I wrote the book about my stories. And then when I wrote the book, and it really was well received, and people reached out to me with their own stories. And so that's why I'm here, because it seems like it's a universal problem or a universal issue, whether some of us perhaps are more along the growth path than others in terms of awareness, but we're all placed in these boxes because it's a human condition. You don't see other animal species putting their colleagues in boxes. And how do we negotiate them when they no longer serve us? So
Yeah.
that's my mission, is to help people recognize boxes that they may not be aware of, and they may be aware of, but they're too afraid to make change. And and then another surprising thing that's come from this is a lot of people have reached out to me and said, I didn't realize the number of people I'm I'm putting them in boxes. Like they didn't realize the boxes that they were putting people in, and how that could be harmful and a disservice to them and their children.
Yeah, yes, I agree 1000% on all of that, and I I had to laugh a couple of times because when you were talking about the mattress, episode, yes, I have purchased those mattresses from, but it reminded me because I was a big Dick Van Dyke fan back in the day, the black and white version, the Dick Van Dyke Show, and I remember Laura received a box and she was so curious about it and she couldn't help herself. It wasn't for her. I think, Laura Petrie, so I'm dating myself severely, but she, it was a like, it was an inflatable boat, right? So she's trying to hide the fact that she opened it from Rob. And of course, it's in the middle of the living room taking up all the space. So yeah, she let the mattress or let the boat out of the box for sure.
Mm,
But yeah, this is, and I don't know, a question for you kind of is, and I'm assuming we're similar generationally, where yes, you do check all the boxes. And now I was not a box checker. I'm still not. But at the same time, we do feel like we have a specific, peer pressure or whatever, or certain expectations that we should meet. Do you think it's sort of generational a little bit? Do you think that women, and I'm speaking mostly of women because I work with women over, 40, 50 plus that
mhm,
are going through very similar times where they just either don't feel worthy or,
mhm,
and I thought the other interesting thing that you said was you didn't feel like you had the right to
mhm,
question because
mhm,
you were successful.
mhm,
And I think that, people do get trapped in their identities
mhm,
with their job or their business or their whatever,
mhm,
and don't know how to separate themselves, right?
mhm, mhm,
And maybe they are super successful, but like you said,
mhm,
weren't happy. So
mhm, mhm,
there were kind of a lot of questions in there,
mhm.
but what are your thoughts around some of that?
I don't know if it's generational. I think gender is one of the boxes that we get put in, and I don't know that that's generational. I have two daughters now, and they're 26 and 25, and they definitely feel like they're put in boxes in being that age as well. I think it's kind of a universal issue. The boxes may change. You know, they both happen to be lesbian, and that was definitely, I mean, it still is, but growing up, I mean, that was, the boxes really changed. And I'm so grateful for that, for them. Um, but there's still, the box is still there. I'm not saying it's not. I mean, it's still there. There's still stereotypes associated that I think are harmful. But so I don't think it's ever going to go away. Um, I think the reason why we even have boxes is, at least I believe, we came from a hunter gatherer species, and you have to know who's good and who's bad and who's a threat to your survival and who's not, or what is. And so you think, okay, good, bad. That's the first box. Those are the first two boxes.
Threat, not threat, right?
Right, exactly. And now I think about how we're so much more inundated with information than that era. How do we process all of this coming in? You have to start to categorize. The problem is when you start to categorize, you start to prioritize and judge, and there's a hierarchy and there's labels, and that's when the problems start. I love the other species in the animal kingdom because they don't do that.
Yeah.
We do, but they don't do that. They don't worry about oh, did I get put in the good girl box today, or did I get booted out of? That's what I always was worried about. Was I booted out of the good girl box today? My mother had this thing where it was her S list, and for the longest time I didn't know what her S list was growing up. And I saw she would always say she's on my
I
S
bet I
list.
can guess.
That's her, her whatever list. And but people never came off it,
Mhm.
And so as a little girl, that frightened me to death because it was I always thought once you're bad, well, not even that. It's like that's the other thing. It's like I was raised that you're bad or you're good, not your
Mhm.
behavior at this moment might have not been a good choice, but you are bad or you are good.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, and I think there's different parenting styles out there now, and I think I still see some of that. Um, I tried to buck the trend early in that, and I got, I was put in boxes for not for just being the opposite of that. So whatever. But at the end of the day, I think boxes are always going to exist. I think some boxes serve us and can serve us at a certain period of time. When I wrote the book, I wanted to be in the author box. I wanted that, whatever that meant to me. I wanted that. I mean, that's not why I wrote the book, but that was pleasing to me. That's not something that's hindering me at the moment. Now it might be hindering other people who never wanted to be an author but had pressure to be an author in their family. But for me, that's a box that serves me right now. It may not serve me in 10 years. So I'm not saying boxes are bad. It's just they you have to be aware of the limitations of the boxes and how destructive they could be.
Yeah, and box is an interesting term. Like I said, I work with helping women get out of their comfort zone, which I've, always been out of my comfort zone. I grew up with an alcoholic parent. I came out at 17, so you're familiar with
Yeah.
that whole scenario.
Yeah.
And that was a long time ago. That was in the 70s. But and it was a little bit different then. So, you know, there's boxes, and like you said, I think that they can, once again, it's fight or flight, right?
Mhm.
Because I work with horses in my coaching practice. And the reason I do that is because horses don't judge you.
Mhm.
They don't lie. They don't have all that baggage that we have. So they can, they move through their emotions and they assess things very quickly. And it allows us as humans to see, oh, okay, I don't have to hang on to that thing. I don't have
Mhm.
to, um, feel like I'm being judged when I'm in the presence of a horse, and how can I then take that out into my regular life? But I
Mhm.
think boxes are also, like, I think about when, being in real estate, right? Um, and how many times have you had to help people with their listing and they've got boxes and boxes and boxes of stuff that they've never opened for the past 200 years that they're
Right.
just moving from place to place to place, right? So I think that is another
Mhm. Mhm.
metaphorical thing, like I'm going to pack up this portion of my life and continue to carry it with me from
Mhm.
location
Mhm.
to location. So
Mhm.
yeah, we put our stuff in boxes, we put
Mhm.
ourselves in boxes, we
Mhm.
put other people in boxes. So a lot of
Very
boxes.
well, and
That's
it was
why it's
funny because I have a
important.
story in my book about my daughter. We were packing up our house to move. And that's another story. I'll tell you that one. But so we're packing up the kitchen, and so one utensils went in one drawer or one box, plates in another. The packer comes, puts the label on the box, and then we come to this new house, and we're unpacking, and my I said to my daughter, what's in the box? And she's like, oh, it's just kitchen stuff. But that's what we do with people. Once we put
Mhm.
a label on them, we assume we know what's inside, and we don't.
Interesting.
And
Yeah.
I remember taking my girls on walks when they were really little, and I love nature, and I would show them all the different trees and the different barks on the different trees and the leaves, the leaf shapes, the leaf colors. And we would talk. I mean, I would talk. They were little, and then, but when I taught them the word tree, then it was like we'd go on the same walk, and I would try to talk more about the trees, and they're like, "Mom, let's go, let's go. We know that's just a tree." So you stop seeing people
Mhm.
once you put the label on the box, and that to me is the thing that we have to be very cautious of when we see people is don't put the label.
Mhm.
You see that a lot with professions. The minute you tell somebody if you were a priest, you're a priest, you immediately have these images. You
Right.
know,
And then we change our whole demeanor about, oh my God, I'm going to interact with this priestly person.
right? You
religious person. I have to mind my P's and Q's.
I remember my girlfriend said she was going to, she was in some kind of food group where they would meet once a month and have a wine club, and they would pick a country and then have the food for the country and the wine for the country. And that she had to go home and get ready for it. And I'm like, oh, that sounds like fun. And then she told me who was hosting. I said, he was this guy, Jeff. I said, Jeff who? And she's like, well, Father Jeff. I'm like, Father Jeff from Queen of Peace? She's like, yeah. I'm like, he's in your wine club? She's like, yeah. And so I did it. I'm like, I had a disconnect. I didn't envision the priest being in a wine club.
Right.
But why not? So it's just, the boxes are everywhere.
The boxes are everywhere. So how do you, I don't know, jump ahead, but how do you change that behavior?
Well, so for me,
that's a big question, I realize.
Well, for me, the first thing was I knew I was discontent, but I couldn't figure out why. So I didn't know I was in these boxes. And so that process was getting in touch with my feelings, which was a whole journey in and of itself. When I started this journey, if you asked me, and as a therapist did, how are you feeling today? I would have either said good or bad. And then she would say, well, what else are you feeling? And I did not have the vocabulary to describe any other emotions. And so being in tune with because your body tells you before your mind tells you.
Mm-hmm.
It feels it first before you can rationally, and they've studied that. Like you will feel it in your body before your mind can rationally think it. So the more you can get in touch with your body, whether it's through meditation, yoga, being out in nature, hikes, whatever your modality is, you've got to get in touch with how you're feeling, because that's going to be your first sign. But if you know the boxes that you're in, then you got to identify, why are you staying? And I think most people stay for a couple of reasons. One is, so I just think humans in general don't like change. I thrive in change. And I love what you said about, being uncomfortable. I was telling somebody the other day, I make it a point every day to be uncomfortable. I'm most comfortable being uncomfortable. Like to me, it's like a muscle. And every morning I wake up and I turn the shower on as cold as it will go. And I take a cold shower, because I think to myself, if nothing else makes me feel uncomfortable today, at least I'm standing in a cold shower for 5 minutes and I've got that out of the way, because I think it strengthens you, and you learn and I've learned how my body responds to it. I don't necessarily like it, but I take more of a mindset of curiosity. Let's see how my body reacts to this. Let's see how I can calm myself down. Let's see what I can think about. How can I make this experience joyful? So understanding that change is okay. Even good change, people resist. It's funny. You probably see that in real estate all the time. I mean, people are moving for great job promotions or a birth, and they're so stressed out because change is it's the unknown. But it's okay. I mean, to me, how do you grow? The only time I'm growing is when I'm changing. If I'm static and everything's smooth sailing and nothing's changing in my life, I'm not growing. And for me, that's one of my core values. I have to have growth. And so that to me is a non-negotiable. So that, being comfortable with change, and to me, just start out with baby steps and incorporating change in your daily life, so that when you have to make bigger changes, it's not so scary. And then I think the other big thing is fear, and fear could be fear of failure. So I made a huge career move from being in the pharmaceutical industry into being in real estate, and being, going from a steady paycheck and benefits to, a variable income and running my own business. And so it could be fear of financial security. And there's ways, especially now with the gig economy, there are so many ways to pad yourself and make that gap work for yourself. It could be fear of status. And I struggled with that. A lot of people maybe don't realize that to be a realtor, you just need a GED and take a state exam. And I came from a background where my family highly valued higher level education. And when I told my parents I was going to be a realtor, I mean, they had spent their life saving so I could go to graduate school debt free. And I'm so blessed by that. Remember, they patted me on the shoulder and said, Betsy, you go do what you need to do. Just know you can't be our realtor. I was 37 years old, single mom with 2 kids. And I was like, what? And I said, why? And they said, well, we're in this house that I had moved back into while I had been through I found myself suddenly single and suddenly laid off when I was in my 30s. And so I moved back home. So I was in their home and they said, well, you remember the lady that sold us this house? And I said, yeah. She said, well, we're going to use her. We would use her. And I said, Mom, that was 40 years ago. She
Right.
said, yeah, but every Christmas she sends us a box of chocolates. And I
Top
said,
of mind. Top of mind.
right. So I was very, very hurt. I have to say, very hurt. But I said to myself, if that's all it takes to
Right.
succeed and get a client for life is a box of chocolate every December, I'm going to make it, I'm going to be just fine in real estate. But,
Funny.
but anyway, back to the fear. Like in my parents' eyes, I'm sure I stepped down several levels in status at that
Well,
time.
there's a box, right? There's a
Right.
box.
Absolutely a box. They wanted me to be a doctor my whole life. And
Yeah.
so that was a big one for me. So it could be fear of status. It could be fear of a loss of social connection. Because to me, it's like a chess game and
Mhm.
you're moving your piece. So then everybody else is affected by it. So your social network is going to change. When you move yourself out of a box, usually your social network is going to change. That's not necessarily bad. You've got to make sure you've got a support system in place for that next leap that you want to take. And you have to recognize that you may be leaving behind people that are on a different growth path or a different journey than you, but that's okay. Um, the biggest exercise that I do whenever I feel like I'm a little bit hesitant is I write it down because fears just manifest in your head and they become so
Oh, yeah.
big. But when you write it down, you read it, and if you were thinking, how would I counsel a friend? You'd be like, that's not that bad. And I always do the worst case scenario exercise. What's the worst that can happen?
Yeah.
Because I think fear of failure is a big one. And that's another box. That's a mental construct. Dogs don't wonder if they're going to fail today. That's never crossed their mind,
Neither
right?
do horses. Yeah. No, they don't
Exactly.
care. They
So,
don't even know what is failure. Yeah.
and failure, what I would deem as failure was totally different than you, right? I mean,
Mhm.
my failure could be somebody like would be grateful for that. So failure is a mental construct that I choose not to have in my life. And because I think worst case scenario, the outcome is not what I expected. I have to make a pivot and I've learned something and grown so that I'm better in the future. That's worst case scenario.
Right.
So what am I fearing? So if you can change that, the way you look at that, I feel like it frees you to make and try baby steps to get yourself out of boxes that no longer serve you.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yes. Very well stated. And when I, this reminds me of when I was learning to fly, and you're on final approach and you're, hovering over the runway and you're like, "Whoa, that feels scary." And then you just kind of hit the gas and take off again. Right. My, my instructor was like, "Any landing that you walk away from is a good one." Like, all right, well, since you put it that way,
Right.
right.
Oh, your perspective, right.
Right? That is so funny, but it's true. I mean, when like, did anyone die? No, no one did, right? Is
Mhm.
anyone going to die from
Yeah.
this thing that you screwed up?
Yeah.
Mm, chances are no,
Right.
right? That's the worst case scenario. But yeah, it's just putting everything in perspective. And I think
Mhm.
we have a really hard time doing that because we're also, in my experience, so worried about what what it looks like to everyone else.
Mhm.
Right,
Mhm.
and, I'm sure you're familiar with Mel Robbins and her new book,
Yeah.
right? Let
Love it. Let them.
let
I love
let
them.
'em think whatever they wanna think. Who
Yeah.
gives a rip, right?
Mhm.
And that's so true. It's so
Mhm.
true, but I think letting go, and I always talk about letting go, like, just like you were talking about letting go of things that no longer serve you, and I've done that a lot in my life, and especially in the past several years. Um, when you do that, I think the hardest thing is not so much actually letting go of something, it's how it's gonna be perceived by
Mhm.
others.
Mhm. But I think what we find when we have the courage
Yeah.
is we find our peeps. We
Oh, absolutely.
attract that which we are most authentic. If we're truly authentic, we're attracting people who are attracted to our authenticity.
Mhm.
Why do I want to be around people who like the
Hold you back.
inauthentic me, right? Yeah. And if they're only liking me because they think this is the way I am, but I'm not really that way, it's probably not serving them and it's not serving me. And then I also think, who's them? We have this nebulous them.
Yeah.
But when you actually
Just
think about
them.
them, who is that? I'm not thinking about people. I mean, I don't spend my days thinking about people and how what they're doing and trying to
Oh,
decide. Yeah, it's they don't care about. I mean, we don't care about them, so they probably don't care about us.
exactly. The only people that care about us are us,
Yeah,
right? I
right.
know when I decided to go to a boxing gym and start, doing boxing fitness. And
Yeah.
I walked in and the warm-up activity is jump rope. Yeah. Well, I looked at them like I'm looking around and everybody's, doing the crossovers and really fast. And I'm like, oh my God. And she handed me the rope and I'm like looking around. And I said, I haven't jumped rope since I was like, and I was not good at it when I was now I'm like 50. So, whatever it was. She's like, nobody's looking at you. Nobody gives a rip about you. Look in the mirror. Who are they looking at? They're looking at themselves. They're not looking. And I'm like, you're right. So I went in the back corner anyway, and I'm like, one, clunk, clunk, two. And then by the time, I mean, after, going to the boxing gym 5 days a week, I got really good at it. But
Mhm.
yeah, nobody's looking at you,
Right,
girl. Stop it.
right.
Nobody
Exactly.
cares.
Exactly.
Oh my God, we are so complicated humans, don't you think?
We make life more complicated than it needs to be.
We do.
Yeah.
Of course we do. Oh my God, that's crazy. So do you have a specific like a method or some that like and I understand, taking baby steps and all of that stuff. Do you have a specific method that's true to you that you convey through your book to help people
That
get
that
out of
is
the
that's coming in my course.
okay. Okay. Sorry, I'm gonna jump ahead there.
Yeah. My book was really my journey and my stories about the different boxes that I've encountered and how I negotiated. Some I didn't negotiate well at all. Some I
Mhm.
I kind of negotiated halfway, and some I negotiated my way in and out of. Um, there's a little bit of method in that, but that was some of the feedback was, okay, I want to do that. And how do
Mhm.
I do that? So that's coming in the course. But I
Okay.
mean, what I like to do is tackle the big ones first. So figure out what your boxes are, which one is having the biggest impact in your life today that's negative, and tackle that one first. Identify what's keeping you in the box, and then there's methods. There's tactics to address each one of those reasons why you might be staying, and then figuring out an action plan with baby steps.
Okay. So you said that you've negotiated a lot of boxes. What was the hardest box for you personally to get out of?
Um, I would say the encompassing of my roles. So like the good daughter box
Mhm.
and the good wife box. I'm divorced now, but I stayed in a marriage that I should have left long before I did.
The
But
marriage box?
well, yeah, and I was raised Catholic, and there's not my family doesn't get divorced, and so I was I was unhappy, but I wasn't also in tune with my feelings at the time. But I knew, I mean, I was physically unhappy, but I didn't acknowledge that. Um, so that caused, I think, a lot of unnecessary delay in my growth. I mean, I feel I was stagnant in my marriage, and then also
Mhm.
the daughter. My parents had a lot of. I allowed my parents to have a lot of influence over me. They love me. They want the.
Talking about your parents putting you in the good box or the bad box, and you mentioned that when you were younger too, where were like you didn't want to be a bad girl, right?
Mhm,
You didn't want to disappoint them or
mhm,
whatever. So
mhm,
yeah, I think that does carry a lot of weight. And also, when you came across that photo originally, the remember her, the
mhm.
little girl on the beach, and then you found your own version of that. As kids, we just don't know any better, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
And I think unlearning all of these behaviors is one of the hardest boxes to get out of,
Mhm.
right? And getting in touch with your intuition and trusting yourself. I mean, we seek so much approval from outside sources that, once again, it goes back to the only person that has to approve of you and your behavior is
It's
you,
you. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
Another good
anyway,
exercise you'd asked me about my approach is, which has really helped me, and I do this with my agents every year, is a life pillar exercise where you take the circle and you divide it up into 6 or 8 life slices,
okay,
and what are your life pillars? Health is on a lot of people's, your finances, your friends and family, your hobbies, your spirituality, your contribution to society, whatever is unique to you, but making sure that you have 6 to 8 solid life pillars and that you're building each of those up so that you don't find yourself too reliant on staying in a box because you don't have you haven't built your life on a solid foundation. I found that when I finally did leave the marriage. At the time, I just had my marriage, my children, and my job. And in a very short period of time, I got divorced. My job laid me off. And so when you're sitting on a 3-legged stool and 2 of the legs
right.
go out, you find
Whoa!
yourself on the floor. And I did. I mean, I really didn't have a solid foundation. And so I took a year to really shore up how do you create a life? We're not taught that. And
Mhm.
and then every year I reevaluate that. I make sure I have mentors in each of those life pillars. My work mentor, Barbara Corcoran, she can't be my spiritual mentor or my health mentor. She's my business mentor. But having mentors, I use it a little loosely in that some of my mentors, they have no idea they're my mentor. I'm watching them from afar. I
Mhm.
follow them on social media. I like what I see. But some are like Barbara, where I have a relationship. So it varies. But really trying to have people that are a couple steps ahead of me,
Mhm.
where I want to get to, has been really helpful to get into a new box. You know.
Yeah. And also leading a team, and you were talking about how, you're steps ahead of your team, right? And you want to make sure that they are taking care of themselves and they're looking at all these things in a
Mhm.
way that's going to be healthy for them so that they don't end up on the three-legged stool that loses a leg,
Yeah.
right? And topples
Exactly.
over. And I do think that, the reason that people do stay in jobs or careers that are no longer serving them and relationships that are no longer serving them is because, it's like what, like you said, it's just so cyclical, right? It goes back to the fear thing and the judgment thing and everything else. And I mean, I walked away from a very lucrative 6-figure career to pursue real estate.
Mhm.
And people are like, what are you, crazy? And I also teach real estate. So it's funny because, the the new people that are coming in, I'm like, you do realize that this is a business.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to give you a paycheck. You're not going to have any benefits. You got to make, and some people, it's like a shock to them. And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, all right, time and investment. But yeah, I think that, we do all stay in situations longer than we need to. I know that I have stayed in several,
Mhm.
much longer past the expiration date. I'm like, whew.
Yeah.
And then when you look back, you're like, why didn't I leave that? It was the writing was on the wall or the
Mhm.
writing was on the inside of the box. I could have just, I think your book should come with include a box cutter, maybe just as a joke.
Oh,
I'm
that's
just
a good
kidding.
idea. They say, when you're in the box, you can't read the label.
Exactly.
I like the box cutter idea. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Just like a plastic one. You don't want anybody to hurt themselves
Mhm.
out of the box, but it might be a fun takeaway or something. Well, that's great. As we're wrapping up here, is there anything else that you would like to share? Like if you, well, okay, this is a good question always. Like, what would you go back and tell your younger self? That little girl on the beach, the 4-year-old girl on the beach, jumping through the waves. What would you tell her?
Well, I would tell her that she's loved, and truly loved for her, not because she um, had success in her business or went to a certain school or had some kind of external validation. Um, but she was loved for just being who she truly was at her core. That would be the biggest. message I would give her. And then the other one would be, well, she wasn't worrying about it at the time, but I think my later self would be, it all works out. It does. I mean, we stress about this, the littlest, I mean, the trivialist things, but we're still here. So we made it, right? And so it couldn't have been that bad. I mean, we made it. What will be will be. It will be okay. It may not be what we wanted, but it will be okay.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you for that. And the other thing is, when you're having a bad day, I always tell myself there's someone out there having an even worse day than I'm
who would
having
love
right
your day? Who would love your
right. It'd be
day?
like you were saying earlier, like when we started the conversation, you didn't think you had the right
Yeah,
to whatever, but
yeah.
yes, there's someone else out there who is struggling much
Mhm.
more than I am. So I think that's really important. This has been a beautiful conversation, Betsy.
Yeah.
What is the best way for people to get in touch with you? Obviously, they can go to Amazon or their favorite bookseller and pick up a copy of your book. But what other ways? You said you have a course coming out.
Yes.
When might that be
The course
happening?
should be out at the end of February. It will be on my website. My website is just my name, betsypepine.com. I'm on all the social channels with my name, Betsy Pepine.
Awesome. All
Yeah.
right. Well, that ought to be easy to find then.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks so much for being on the show. I really appreciate you. And for those of you who are listening today, if you're stuck in a box or if you know somebody else who's stuck in a box, odds are good that you do. I'm just saying, everyone is in a box of some sort. And it could be like that Russian doll kind of a box where you open one box, you get out of that one, and you get another one and another one, right? So there's layers of boxes and so forth. Please share this episode with a friend or a family member or somebody else. Reach out if you're having trouble getting out of the box and you just can't find the box cutter, and get some help. Right? There's always someone there that's willing to support you. So thank you for listening. I really appreciate you. Please, the way we stay in the air, support this podcast. Podcasters are, a lot of times it's a labor of love, and I do love what I do, and I love talking to people like Betsy and sharing information with all of you. So please like, rate, subscribe. We love you. Please keep coming back. And that's it for today on A Life Worth Being. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to today's episode of A Life Worth Being. I hope you found it fun and inspiring. And to avoid a bad case of FOMO, please be sure to click that subscribe button. If you love what you heard today, please share it with a friend and then hop on over to your favorite podcast platform and return the love with a wonderful review and 5-star rating. It would truly mean the world to me. Be sure to follow me on Instagram and on my website. Links below in the show notes. I appreciate you, and I will see you next week for more fresh insights on awakening a life worth being.